So today we are diving deep into probably one of the biggest shifts impacting every leader and coach in the world today, and that is the rising generations, right? Gen Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012, and Generation Alpha, born 2013 and on, they are the first truly digital generations, right? They have grown up with smartphones and social media is almost as an extension of their identity. Now, while Gen Z is known for being tech savvy, pragmatic, and very socially conscious, they also demand purpose-driven work, radical transparency, and a lot of flexibility. Gen Alpha is following suit as the first truly AI native generation, expecting a hyperactive and gamified experience as the norm in all areas of their life. Now, the challenge for coaching leadership is that these expectations, they are crashing headfirst into the traditional competitive and team environments that we have grown up in. Coaches today are asked or expected to navigate a generation that, according to experts like Jonathan Haidt, face an unprecedented mental health crisis stemming from this great kind of rewiring of childhood, as he calls it. This generation has also experienced overprotection in the real world and at the same time underprotection online. And this has resulted in a generation that, while it's highly capable, often struggles with emotional resilience and requires a leadership style that's rooted in deep empathy, right? And they also expect instant, continuous feedback and a clear focus on their mental well-being. These simple, old hierarchical models are not working with this generation. Now, this is all creating some tension, right? A tension that is forcing us to evolve as coaches, as leaders. And the thing is, we see coaches struggling with everything from communication gaps and fostering team loyalty to providing the rapid athletic advancement and clear boundaries that these young athletes expect. Now, to help us bridge this gap and learn how to better lead the athletes who will soon make up our entire team, if they don't already, we are going to be unpacking Gen Z and beyond with our very own co-host Betsy Butterick, who is the author of the brand new book, Kids These Days. Right? Betsy's book is specifically geared toward helping you, a coach, understand and more effectively connect with the unique mindset of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and it is available now on Amazon. Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nurbin, and I am joined with my co-hosts, Betsy Butterick and Nate Sanderson. Just a reminder, the mission of this podcast to help you become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. Now let's get right into it. So today is going to be a unique episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast. We are going to be interviewing you, Betsy, about your new book, Kids These Days, and trying to explore, really why you decided to write this book, kind of the story of crafting the book, and probably looking at some of the maybe resistance that a lot of us as coaches might actually experience when it comes to even the desire to put effort into some of the things that you're going to be discussing. So I want to start with this question for you, Betsy. I know you're kind of at the part where you're about to launch this book in the next few weeks here. And I know there's a lot of excitement with that. There's also just a lot of celebration, just a sigh of relief as you just kind of like have finished the arduous task of writing a book. I believe it's your first book. And so my question for you is, how did this book come about, right? Like, what was the story about for you, like compelled you to go, you know what? I know I wanted to write a book, but this is the book I'm going to write.
Yeah, the whole journey of doing work around coaching Gen Z, Gen Alpha began really in 2018. And I just finished a communication workshop with San Diego State University. And one of the associate ADs caught me afterwards and she said, "Hey, Bets, do you have anything about coaching kids these days? Because I feel like they're a little bit different." And I said, "Ooh, Not yet, but that sounds like a fascinating topic to research. And the more I started to dive into the research and also through conversations with coaches at all levels of different sports, it became very clear that this was a challenge that was not uniquely experienced by some people in one place or in one sport. And so over the past 7 years or so, every conversation that I've had with increasing frequency, I'll say like the last 3, 4 years, have really reached a point where coaches are opting out of the profession because this isn't what they signed up for, or they're being asked to leave the profession, sometimes not by choice, because of an inability to connect with kids these days. So we know that the sport has changed and continues to evolve. And what I'm seeing is a need for coaches that desire to stay in the game to have a different elevated experience while still being able to do what they signed up for, but with kids that are different than previous generations. So this book is meant to create understanding while also providing actionable tools and strategies that any coach can use to support their ability to coach kids these days without lowering their standards or expectations.
Yeah, let's unpack real quick what is the challenges that coaches face with kids these days. Why are they a big problem and a hot topic? I mean, it feels like to us that they're more the blame of today's challenges and coaches than previous generations. I'm not sure. I'm a millennial, so I don't really know how much they were complaining about millennials back when I was playing, but it definitely doesn't feel like that. The narrative was that strong. Whereas today, a lot of you know older generation coaches are struggling. Like I think there is, just to throw out the big words, the buzzwords is entitlement and soft are two big ones that we hear a lot of. I mean, you spend so much time with coaches, and then Nate, I feel free to jump in here too. Like, what are we hearing when it comes to coaches around our complaints around Gen Z and Gen Alpha?
Well, I think an interesting perspective for me, JP, was the first time I came across Tim Elmore's work on Gen Z and just the differences in generations. And he's got a line in his book where he's looking at this from a parent perspective, but I think it's really relevant for coaches too, where he said essentially like Gen Z was the biggest difference between one generation to the next, Generation X compared to Generation Z, in the history of humankind. And he goes back through kind of, for most of our species, existence, a parent and a child's world were very similar because there just wasn't a lot of change in the world. And so, because of that, a parent had a much better understanding of what the child might be experiencing, because that's also what they experienced as a child growing up and learning their way in the world. And now it almost feels like there's so much difference. I mean, I'm old enough, I'm 47, to have grown up, where phones were still attached to the wall and didn't have social media and that sort of thing. But what world my kids are growing up in is far different. And I never experienced any of that, and I don't understand it. And so it's almost like raising, kids in a foreign country, so to speak, in the sense that I don't get it, and I think that presents a huge challenge for, my generation of coaches for sure. But I think even from Gen Z to Gen Alpha, there's so many differences that we can't just look at our experience compared to their experience. Certainly as human beings, there are some consistencies there, but in terms of the context of the world and their expectations and that sort of thing, it's totally foreign. And so there's just so much to learn and understand, not only about ourselves, but also about kids these days, to make that work, that it is a lot of work to try and bridge that gap between two generations that really don't understand each other.
Yeah, Nate, to your point, and JP mentioned, entitled, soft, like there's an exercise I often do when I do one of the Gen Z or Gen Alpha workshops live, where I invite the audience to finish the phrase kids these days with whatever is true in their experience. And before that, I ask people by a show of hands if they were born during or after 1997, so that we identify the members of Gen Z in the audience, because it's an awkward situation when people talk about you as if you're not in the room. And then when people fill in the blank of kids these days, I remind them, you can say whatever's true for you. Remember that they can hear you, right? Because they're in the audience. And I've heard the full gamut. I've heard, soft, entitled. I've heard instant gratification. I've heard, so attached to their phones, can't make eye contact, can't have face-to-face conversations, very self-absorbed even. So I've heard like the really critical pieces. And then I've also heard in the same room, I don't think kids these days are that different from kids of any generation. And to your point, Nate, and I'm 42, so elder millennial, falling in this category. I grew up in a house where the phone was attached to the wall. And at some point you had to pick between, do you want to use this thing called the internet or the phone? Because you can't do both at the same time. And part of the challenge for coaches these days, especially those that have kids, but even those that don't, those who are coaching today's athletes, is that we have experienced the changes in technology at the same time. Right? So in my lifetime, in your lifetime, JP and Nate, we've all experienced the changes in technology at the same time. What we fail to realize sometimes is that when we experience those changes in technology is at a very different point in our lives than today's athletes, the people that we're coaching. So yes, you went through the same technology changes that most people did in the world, but how you experience them at critical points of your development is wildly different. So the invention of the internet, and for Tim's work, it's like the biggest technological change that has catapulted us forward is the invention of the internet. And so, yeah, we experienced it at a certain point in our lifetime, but kids these days have never known life without it. And that is a huge, huge, huge difference. And I spend an introductory part of the book explaining some of the nuances in technological changes that have been normal for today's athletes and were completely new for anyone that's of an older generation. And so starting from that place of understanding is like, okay, but how different can they be? I've experienced technology in the same way that they have. You have and you haven't. Because I remember we were interviewing the lead researcher for the anxious generation, and he was talking about a play-based childhood versus a screen-based childhood. And the list of nuances within the technological changes is vast. And all of it correlates to say that the kids we are coaching today have experienced technology very differently. And because of those technological changes, the same ones we've experienced, but at a different time, they are showing up in our sporting environments in different ways. The more we can understand and replace judgment with understanding, which is by and large what the book is designed to do, the more we can understand about how and why they're different, the more intentional we can be in how we approach so that we can effectively coach kids these days without compromising those standards or expectations.
Yeah, so there's a question I have coming up for me now that I would love for all of us, the three of us, to answer this. And I don't necessarily know there's a right answer, but from your perspective, all these changes that Gen Z, Gen Alpha have gone through and their differences, right? They've gone through, technology, screens, Google answers right there, YouTube videos, the social media, AI now, COVID, right? That's all shaped them to be very, very different than we would find ourselves, where we probably relate more to other generations, right? As we've discussed. And all of this, as a coach, what's the hardest part about it for us as coaches today? This whole coaching Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
The most frequent reply I hear is it's one more thing. Like, coaching has changed and there's already so much that we need to do. Even without kids these days being different, there are so many additional responsibilities that are outside of what many coaches originally signed up for. They just want to coach the sport. But now they have to do all this additional work. And now they find themselves even more challenged by kids these days. So it just feels like one more thing. And when we talk about barriers, yes, understanding technology and the influence and impact is a barrier. Kids these days, being the problem, is not getting any coach closer to a solution. And it works both ways. Like, today's athletes often cite, their challenges with coaches these days. As long as another generation or a group of people are being identified as the problem, it's going to be very difficult for us to work towards solutions. So I think even substituting the answer of, well, what's the problem? Kids these days are the problem. What's the problem? Coaches these days are the problem. Even if we substitute context is a challenge, right? So when we stop blaming other people for why our job as coaches has become harder, And some coaches blame administrators. The expectations are different. Some coaches blame parents. Parents are expecting more, that are like wildly outside the scope of what's realistic. So I often hear in conversations coaches finding so many people to blame for the additional workload that they feel. And I get it. It is hard, and I'll say a potentially scary time to be a coach because of all these things that are outside of what many coaches originally signed up for. So I think that barrier of feeling like there's one more thing to do, layer into it, it gets personal. So what is it about me that is preventing me from being effective as a coach? And it's then amplified either in social media, in the court of public opinion, or on anonymous surveys, where a coach is being criticized for who they're not without knowing what the expectations really are, or who the information is coming from, or where the complaints lie. So it just becomes overwhelming so quickly to feel like, okay, not only do I have to do all these additional things outside of just coaching the sport, which is what I really signed up to do, but I don't know how to make these changes without feeling like I'm losing myself, or I'm being inauthentic, or I have to be a way that doesn't align with who I take myself to be. So there's the external challenges, but also the internal, which again, I think Brene Brown says blame is the easiest way to offload anger, fear, and frustration. So I get it, but it doesn't get us closer to what we really want, which is to get back to coaching our sport, to experience the joy of sport, and to educate young people and support their growth and development.
JP, I think if I could add to that too, like this idea of not necessarily just here's another thing, but I don't feel equipped to do that thing. So if you're telling me in the game of basketball, hey, this year you're really going to have to figure out how to break a press because a lot of teams in our league are going to start to press. There's a million resources for that. There's a million, places that you can go, people you can talk to who have dealt with the press before, and you can get great systems and strategies and figure that out. Like there's no lack of knowledge and information when it comes to the tactics and strategies of whatever game it is that we coach. But that feels like it's becoming less and less a percentage of what we're actually doing. Or another way to say that is, if I don't get all these other things over here right, the relationships and the connections and the communication piece and the parents and blah, 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 I don't even get a chance to coach a press break, right? And then we start to look at, okay, well, if that really becomes almost the essence of what is necessary in order for you to be effective and do your job well or keep your job at all, where are coaches getting that kind of education and support? I mean, it's not really part of coaching education. It wasn't part of what I had to do to get a coaching authorization or a license in the state of Iowa. And it's not typically a part of most coaching clinics that people attend or, the resources that they're looking at. And so here's this added responsibility, added expectations. I don't think administrators really know how to support coaches in that context either, because they're also trying to figure it out just like we are. So it really does become a difficult world to operate in when the training, the support, the education piece, it just isn't there for coaches who do want to do their best to adapt.
Yeah, that question of what's the hardest part about it for coaches, I definitely, the answers you both shared, I would say coaches deeply resonate. Maybe some will also resonate. Where I went with it when I was thinking about that question was the gap is so wide, like from a value standpoint, that, and it's getting wider and wider. I mean, I remember when I was playing college basketball at South Carolina, I mean, I think everyone but me went on to play professionally basketball. I don't know what that says about my game, but anyways, like everyone else was, went on to play professional basketball, but there was still an element of like, for most guys, that this is going to be a short journey here, of our career. And now there's just already so much money involved in the collegiate. There's money involved in the high school athletics now, right? The value system that these kids are growing up, the parents, it just seems like there's just a chasm here, like a huge chasm divide between my purpose in coaching, which is to develop great people, to build and to provide this experience, this team experience. And then everyone else just seems to be doubling down on the transactional side of it. What am I going to get? And you look at that all being just absolutely magnified with social media and everything, because now every athlete starts to think, well, I can get that. I could achieve that, whereas 30 years ago, Michael Jordan was like, that's a far off world. Or, like we never just got to see, their lives. I was listening to a podcast with Morgan Housel. He's coming out with a new book. He's one of my favorite authors. And he was just talking about how, like, yeah, we grew up in an age with like MTV Cribs, but they were just celebrities. Right now, it's on our phone and we see people walking around and we see what we don't have and all that. It's just exemplifies everything. So I just find the values difference to be very, very wide for coaches, and feeling like I don't think they even want what I have to offer here or what I'm trying to provide.
And the reality is they may not. Like, that's one of the things that I talk about in the book, how many people were raised to respect your elders. And then how frequently I hear from today's athletes of, I'm not just going to respect you because you're older than me. That doesn't make any sense. And to your point, JP, and I just made notes, like, these are the challenges when you say, like, what's the problem, or what gets in the way of coaches being able to readily adapt to today's athletes? The gap is wide and widening for many people. The pressure is intense from all sides, players, parents, administrators. You're trying to win, ideally, Education is limited. To your point, Nate, this isn't something that's routinely taught if we have any sort of licensing in our sports, and not all sports do, but this isn't a regular part of coach education. The fear is real for coaches of, if I don't win, if I don't connect, if we don't perform, what happens to my professional livelihood? And even if I do all the things really well, I'm one complaint away, one investigation away from having my career tainted. And then the biggest barrier is time. And I was talking with an administrator about this yesterday. So many coaches have a desire to change. And I'll put that desire in air quotes. They understand there's a need for them to change. Change is always challenging for most people, and there is not enough time. So if I'm going to unlearn tools, strategies, tactics that used to work but are no longer as effective, and relearn new tools, techniques, strategies for working with kids these days, when am I expected to do that? Because I have my team now. We're in preseason now. I'm expected to win now. I'm expected to provide a positive experience for every athlete on my roster now. I don't have time to do the work necessary to start to close the gap. There's so many real, valid challenges for today's coaches when it comes to coaching the modern athlete. And that was why I felt it would be helpful is, okay, I love doing workshops. I love having individual conversations. What if I could put everything that I've found helpful over the last 7 years out in a resource that anybody can use at any time? The whole purpose of this book, it's always been a goal of mine to write a book. I never knew what book I wanted to write, but the various challenges of this time within a coaching landscape, this is the book that I want to write so that it can be out in the world to do the good that it can do for those that decide, I know I need to make a change. I don't know how. I don't have time. Can you help me? And can you help me quickly? And everything that is referenced in the book is meant to be some small shift that any coach can make today. And that's the accessibility piece, is like, okay, what can I do starting today that might move the needle, that might start to close the gap, that might reduce a little bit of the felt pressure or fear, that might increase the performance ability of the athletes that I'm working with. But it's real challenges, and I get it. And so the purpose of this book was, how do I help those that know they want to change but might not know how, and definitely don't feel like they have the time?
Let me play a little, I don't know, devil's advocate. There's probably some coaches out there going, yeah, I get what you're saying, Betsy, but end of the day, like, it's not on me to figure it out. Like, they've got to figure out the way the world works, right? They've got to figure it out. I mean, I was actually listening to that podcast, listening to Morgan Housel. He was talking about how almost every generation at some point, people have been like, ooh, yeah, they're struggling. Even the greatest generation, they weren't the greatest generation until World War II came upon them. Some discussion was made there. I don't know how true it was, but either way, there's this whole thing of like, they'll just have to figure it out, right? Like, pain eventually. And when you look at the generation, Gen Z, when a lot of metrics like mental health, financial wealth, fulfillment in life, right? It just seems to be all the markers. They seem to be struggling. Will that suffering, will that be enough to have them change? So what do you say to coaches who say, that's just not my responsibility?
First, I'll validate and say, it's not your responsibility. This is not what you signed up for. While it's not your responsibility, you have an incredible opportunity because you know that life is going to come at kids these days hard. And I hear this all the time. So you want us to just be soft on kids these days? Absolutely not. That's not setting them up for success. That's not helping prepare them for, quote, the real world. And I remember it was a football coach, not to be stereotypical, but it was a football coach who about halfway through one of the workshops that I do on Today's Athletes said, okay, but what about when they get to the real world? Like, we can make these small shifts or adaptations. That's cute. He was very direct. That's cute. But how does it help prepare them for the real world? And so over time, I've adapted so that earlier in the workshop, I'm very clear about one thing, two things really. The first, for anyone that's listening, I am not there to change you as a coach. My goal is to give you options so that if at any point you decide a change would be beneficial, you get to make that call. So I'm not here to change coaches. For those that see a change as beneficial, here's some ways that you could make that adaptation. The second thing is, I don't want you to be soft on kids these days because life is hard. And while it is not your responsibility, you have an incredible opportunity through the vehicle of sport to help kids learn to do hard better. And I think it's on a podcast that Tim Elmore was on where, he said, because of technology creating greater ease, many young people today, the ones that we're coaching, have equated hard with bad. So if we know life is hard and they experience hard as bad, gosh, what an opportunity we have within sport to teach them how to work through the hard, to teach them the value of hard that you can argue is more innate for older generations, like hard work pays off, right? Now they're like, technology's made it easy. I don't have to work that hard. I still get the same results, which just becomes incendiary for older generations of like, that's not fair. No, it's not. It's not. But it is the world that we live in. So a question I have for coaches is, what's the hard that you want to do? In the same way that you're saying life is going to come at kids hard, yes. And coaching right now is hard. So what's the hard that you want to do? Do you want to do the hard work of making adaptations in order to connect with kids these days so that you can teach them the skills needed to handle their own hard later on? Or do you want to just say, well, it's not my responsibility? Because that's also hard, because there's likely a shortened timeline in which you'll no longer have the option to continue to coach the sport that you love. Or you might have kids leave, or you might have certain complaints from parents or, athletes. So what's the hard that you want to do? I'll layer into that. It's arguably easier for one person, for me as a coach, to shift or change than it is to try to change an entire generation. And I watch painfully so many coaches sit back and say they need to figure it out. Agreed. They need to figure it out, and they could really benefit from your help figuring it out. So I don't want people to be soft on kids these days. The invitation throughout the book is, can you connect with them? Establish that shared understanding, which our generational differences have widened the gap on. Can we create understanding? Can we facilitate connection? And then once we have that connection, that trust, that respect, then can you help them practice hard? And this is another big theme from the book is it's not impossible, it's unpracticed. The things that I often hear from coaches about the challenges of working with today's athletes, the skills that they don't have that they should have because I'm an older generation and I had them. Why is it so hard for kids these days? It's not impossible, it's unpracticed. So yeah, life's going to come at them hard and it is not your responsibility, but my gosh, you have an incredible opportunity to establish a unique connection because you are their coach and to help give them reps at hard things so that they are better prepared for life after your program. You don't have to, but wow, what a fantastic opportunity.
Betsy, I know this conversation is intended to get people to read the book, and we're not going to have time to get into the weeds with everything. But what you just shared there, I do have a kind of a follow-up question with that connection piece. Where do you think coaches either struggle the most or maybe miss their opportunity to connect with this generation? Because one of the things that came up for me as you were talking is that I think that connection piece, knowing a kid, building a relationship, is really more about how they feel. Like I'm thinking about, how do I get a kid to accept their role? Well, I would make a logical argument about how the team is better if you do this and it fits with these pieces, and therefore we're gonna, that's part of what being a team is, as a sacrifice of self. I'm making a rational argument here, but that's not a connection, right? And that experience of trying to get a player to fulfill a role is more of an emotional state that they have to figure out, or we have to figure out, than it is a logical argument. So if we were just going to drill down for a second on this idea of connection, what's the tip? What's the thing for coaches that we could do better to facilitate connections that matter more to kids these days?
Great question, Nate. And again, big challenge. So what often gets in the way of that connection is judgment and or comparison. So, and I had this conversation with a coach the other day. She asked an athlete in her sport about her goals or about, desire, something related to that. And the answer she got back, she didn't like. She has an unspoken expectation, given the potential she sees in this athlete, of what they should want or how they should go about getting that. So, judgment of, if you're here at this level, or if you're choosing to be part of this program, or if you've invested this time, you should want these things, because that's what great athletes do. Judgment, and then also comparison of, I would never say that, or that's so different from who I am or who I was when I was playing. So that's one part. The second part, and I'm fully in the camp of coach as educator. If we hope to teach them, it benefits us to first reach them. And reaching them, even on an emotional level, does not involve lecturing them. They are totally uninterested in what you have to say until they first understand where is the value for them. And if you hear that and you're thinking, well, that sounds really selfish. Yeah, okay. But again, go back to technology. Kids these days have had the ability to customize so many elements of their life from a very early age. That same desire comes into their sport experience, which is why co-creation is so important for the modern athlete and benefits the coach as well. If we want to increase accountability, ownership, engagement, we need to co-create. Co-creation is not a lecture. It's not a monologue. It's a dialogue. Now, when we have that dialogue, this is where I sometimes see many coaches with good intention cross the line. What I mean by that is the last question is like, well, how do you like to be coached? Great intention. I want to know what's true for you so that I can best coach you. Unintended negative impact. If I, as an athlete, tell you how I like to be coached, and then at any time experience something outside of what I've said is my preference, now obviously you're being disrespectful. Like, I told you how I like to be coached. You're not doing it. That's offensive. Now I have a problem. So even making a small shift in language of what's the most effective way to coach you? Because now whether I do it or not, it's not personal. It might be less effective. That's my choice to make as a coach. I don't have a personal issue with that as an athlete. And all I've done is change the language. So whether it's leaning into practices like motivational interviewing, the best coaches, the most successful coaches that I've seen at all levels of sport, working with today's athletes, are exceptionally good at asking questions. And not the rhetorical kind, like, is that as hard as we can go? No, that's BS. Like, they see through that. They value transparency. Don't ask that question. Don't ask any question that you actually don't want a response to. You're wasting your time and theirs. And time is one of the values for today's athletes. So helping them practice that communication. Now, I have coaches say all the time, okay, but what if I ask a question and nobody answers? That comes up frequently. And probably for people listening, you're like, yeah, what about that? Because that happens to me all the time. So I stop asking questions because it's a waste of everyone's time. You just said time matters. That is less about the fact that somebody doesn't know and more about an additional challenge for kids these days is, in large part due to social media, they've been disproportionately conditioned compared to previous generations to value the opinions of others. It's not that they don't know. It's they're worried about, how am I going to be judged by my peers if I speak first, if I stutter when I speak, if I give the wrong answer, if somebody disagrees with or thinks differently about the answer that I provide in this space. So many nuanced challenges and absolutely ways to facilitate those spaces to create the connection that we desire, that they desire, that benefits coaches and athletes. So misconnection for me, often observed in very small moments. And great intention on the part of the coach, often unintended negative impact for the athlete. And that's hard.
I know you're going to go so much into some of the strategies within the book, which is why coaches need to pick it up and buy it. But I'm curious, at the end of the day, let's say coaches get the book, they implement the strategies. How do you know this is going to actually be effective? At the end of the day, there's so many forces working against them, like all the technology, parents, culture, right? It just feels like, okay, yeah, you got some great strategies, Betsy, but how is that? Like, where have you seen this work? Maybe share some stories of impact that you've seen within the teams that you worked with to give us some hope.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking about hope because that's what a lot of coaches feel like they're lacking right now in their professional experience. Um, Without naming names, what I've seen broadly through individual coaches or through work with programs is for individual coaches, I've seen transitions from they're at risk of losing their job. They've had 1-2 years of arguably negative feedback on their end of season surveys. They may have gone through 1 or 2 investigations. They are not connecting, and that's a problem for them, for their administration, for the powers that be. To see those coaches in a very short amount of time start to transform the way that they provide a sport experience while still holding to everything that they value as part of their program. And then to hear from those coaches that this is so much easier. This is fun again. I actually like my team. The roster hasn't changed, but how they experience the team that they are coaching, that has changed for them. So within programs, what I see is the ability collectively to get back to what we really want to do is we want to compete together. We want to learn together. We want to win together. And being someone who gets to have conversations on both sides, even in the same program, to talk with athletes, to talk with coaches, and then to facilitate greater understanding, greater connection. The blanket answer I would have to your question, JP, is, when you say, well, how do we know it's going to work? If there's 2 things that coaches can do to increase the likelihood of success in implementing anything that's in the book, number 1 is level setting expectations. So making sure that from the get-go and then revisit it as often as possible, we are very clear with what we expect of athletes, what they can expect of us, but we also understand what athletes expect of us and what we can expect of them. It's a 4-part conversation. And then we identify, and there's an activity to do this specifically in the book, we identify where are current expectations that are out of alignment, and then how do we have conversations to level set those before we actually get into the experience of team. The second part I'll say is creating shared responsibility. Because again, not only is it not enough time, but it is wildly unfair to expect one coach to be all things to all people. So we need to have conversations as coaches within our team to, as often as possible, and there are so many opportunities to do this, to create shared responsibility. So that when we give our best effort, we do the things that are in the book, that there is the opportunity for things to not go well without it being our fault. And again, I talked about blame before, but this isn't about making it their fault. This is about educating them that their experience is also a shared responsibility. It is not up to their coach to provide a great experience, a positive experience, and ensure that for every person on the roster. Using the element of choice, having conversations that specifically illustrate the choices athletes have within the expectations that we've set. Not only is it co-creation, but it optimizes an outcome where everyone has a better quality experience.
Betsy, I know a lot of what we've talked about so far are like strategies for reaching and building connection. And you mentioned the word collaboration there. But I wonder if you would answer this question. And I don't know if this is in the book or not. So this might be outside of even the context there. But as you keep talking about how coaches react to kids these days, the frustrations that we feel with more responsibility, and I think it almost sounds like sometimes a capitulation. I have to give up what I've always done to, whether it's accommodate or to reach these kids. Is there some inner work that the coach needs to do to explore a little bit about why do I feel so much resistance to coaching kids these days?
Yes, absolutely. And if I'm working with an individual client, that's often where we start. And as a communication specialist, the topic of resistance is a constant question on my mind. Where is the resistance? Even within an athlete, like a coach working with an athlete, what I see generationally is a misidentification between a can't and a won't. Like a coach will say, oh, this kid just won't do it. They won't buy in. They won't try this thing. They won't change their swing. When what's true for the athlete is they can't yet do that because of X, Y, and Z. They haven't been taught how. They haven't had success previously. The only way that they get validation, love from a parent, let's say, is when they succeed. So they're putting the relationship with their parent at risk if they try to change this thing. So just finding those reflective moments of what am I making it mean? Where is the resistance, even within myself? What is triggering for me in some way? When I have this conversation or I notice this behavior, like take inventory. Start there before you even buy the book. It's not worth trying new things if you don't first understand what are you working with? What is your foundation? Where are you starting from? And that's one of the chapters in is like, what is it about kids these days that is currently a barrier for me as a coach? And I have a whole list of examples that are very common that come up for a lot of coaches. But understanding what's currently getting in the way and preventing us from connecting with kids these days, from coaching kids these days, from having more of the experience we say we want to have. And when I work with an individual client, it's like, okay, what's most important to you? Talk to me about your ideal experience. Now talk to me about your current experience. Talk to me about your resistance. Now let's talk about some ways that you can get more of what you want within what you value to minimize that resistance and optimize the joy. And that's something that we can do. But to your point, Nate, yes, it absolutely first requires some self-reflection. Because if you try to change, but you're not sure what you're working on and why, it's unlikely you're going to lower that resistance. It's still going to become problematic at some point. So I appreciate that question.
Yeah, and I know probably the book and the strategies that coaches could learn from the book are probably also very applicable to parents and their strategies for working and connecting and raising great kids, right? And that's what's got me excited about it too.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of parents that are coaches who've come up afterward and say, I understand my kids so much better now. And I've been trying to do these things and it definitely doesn't work. And now I understand why, separate from a coaching context. And the woman, Samantha Exrand, who wrote the foreword for the book, she is a parent, a sports parent. She's also a sports lawyer. She works with coaches, administrators. And she said, this book, that's really is for coaches and administrators and parents. And it's to help us connect with the people that matter most to us in our lives, our colleagues and our kids. So yeah, if it's a benefit to you, like, please make use of it. That's what it's there for. And just thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation.
So where can coaches get this book? Yeah, where should we check it out?
The pre-sale begins tomorrow, which is October 1st. And the book will be available everywhere where you like to buy books, whether it's the ebook or the paperback copy. It'll be sold on Amazon. It'll be sold through my website. You can find the links on social media, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn. So start, if you want, with Instagram. That's typically the easiest place for people to go and just click on a link. But there's going to be a page on my website dedicated specifically to the book and different options that people have for the book. So I would say start with social media, LinkedIn, Instagram. We can also provide a link in the show notes so that if you just want to click there and read more about the book, that you have the opportunity to do so.
All right, that's it for today's episode. I can't encourage you enough, obviously, to check out Betsy's book, Kids These Days. It's available on Amazon. We'll have some links in the details of this episode, or you can head on over to betsybutterick.com to learn more about the book. I know today we were really spending a lot of time unpacking the challenge. Her book is the solutions. So be sure to check out Kids These Days. And also be sure to subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox to get the notes to this and every episode of the podcast, as well as other weekly tools to build your culture. And I would encourage you to check out TOC Coach. You can learn more about TOC Coach at tocculture.com. It is our all-access online community for coaches that want to grow their leadership, improve their culture. People are really committed into it. It is got all the online courses and digital resources that will help you to train and implement, train yourself as a leader and implement the culture framework, and at the same time to marinate in a culture of transformational, in a community of transformational coaches. And so I think, the coaches that I've been talking to that have been in TOC Coach, the feedback has been the app for TOC Coach, which is hosted on School, has become their new go-to app. No longer are they hopping on Twitter or Instagram. Like, here's where they're scrolling, and here's where they're engaging with others out there. And just by marinating in that community, it's already transforming their leadership and giving them new ideas for their team's culture.